Matthew wrote that when Jesus entered the city, the whole people were in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" Mary Beton, a lady, an actor actually, commonly known as a character actor. I don't know if that makes you not quite an actor, but you're a character actor. My wife will kill me for saying that, making that distinction. But Mary Beton, an actor and a very strong advocate for her faith in working in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, wondered the same question. And it led her to write a series about 9 different meditations upon the people of the Passion. And my wife Donna acts out all of these readings during Holy Week has done so in different places. Mary Beton wrote, "For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to speak about the Lord as a friend, a really good and close friend." And so she found a way to do that through this writing of these series of readings, the people of the Passion. A work that she hoped would serve us well as we listen to the utterances from what she called the fringe people around the day of Jesus' crucifixion. She talks about the woodcutter whose craft was to actually provide the wood on which the cross was made. Excessive Magdalene, she calls her, Mary Magdalene, who anointed Jesus' feet and dried them with her tears, with her hair. There's a daughter and the maid that saw Jesus in the time of their life when he came through their village and were in Jerusalem, and there they saw him in a different way. The servant girl who confronted Peter in the courtyard. Jairus' daughter, who Jesus raised from the dead. She too, she imagines, was in Jerusalem for that occasion, for something else, and came across the crucifixion. There's a centurion who sat at the foot of the cross. The bride of Cana, celebrating Passover herself. A silversmith who had been robbed by a thief, and he was there to see the thief's crucifixion. And a nephew to a shepherd whose uncle many years ago told the story of a remarkable event on a hillside and a trip to a stable. And then there was Pilate's wife, who had had a dream. And here's what she had to say.
My husband, Pilate, the mighty Roman procurator of Judea, was judging a criminal from Nazareth who had claimed to be king of the Jews. The man had been scourged and brought before him for his crime. I must assure you, my husband knows a great deal about crime. I have seen him disguise Roman soldiers as Jews, send them to mingle in the crowds, watch for a given signal, then turn and kill innocent Jews wantonly. I've watched him steal temple funds and spend sacred money on pet projects of his own. And once, I even saw him order an attack on a religious procession of Jews. They were dressed for dying, he said. He applauded how neatly they fell into the folds of their holy garments. But this was all in his later years, when he had many chins, his brain gone, his heart turned to stone. When I married him, he was lean and handsome, full of hope. I was the one who made it possible for him to be procurator, as granddaughter of Caesar Augustus. I even was favored enough to follow him to his assignment. And so you see, in the beginning, I watched all he did with a lively interest. When he judged the man from Nazareth, I sneaked down the back stairs from my chambers to have a look at the criminal from between the curtains behind my husband's throne. "Are you the king of the Jews?" my husband was yelling. No answer. "Are you the king of the Jews?" He became enraged with the silence. The back of his neck went red. His ears inflamed like tiny lanterns on either side of his head. The air was charged with challenge. The man's blood dripped on the flagstone. It was as though he were waiting for something. From the center of the curtains, I stuck my head out further. The man from Nazareth slowly lifted his face till he met my eyes, raised his voice, and deliberately said to me, "Thou hast said it." I staggered backwards and dashed up the stairs and fell on my bed. How did he know I was there? Why was he talking to me? Voices reached me through my window. They had taken him outside below my porch. Orders were given for a crown and cloak for the king, and I think I fainted. In my dreams, I looked down at him beneath the branches of a tree. The crown of thorns on his head were arms reaching up to me. The scarlet cloak on his torn shoulders set his body on fire, and the people's arms reached higher and higher in the flames for me to save them. I knew he had the power to flee. "Fly away," I called to him. Yet he raised his head again to me, his eyes as soft and warm and full of promise as the April earth upon which he stood. It was my first experience of innocence. I had been born into power, manipulation, force, and yet I knew what he was telling me. This innocent, foolish man was going to die for me. Why? Why was he singling me out? When I awoke, I found my maid and said, "Go to my husband and repeat this message." And since I've been introduced to the King of the Jews and come to know the flight of innocence and the power to save, I have a message for you. Be careful what you dream. It may come true.
You should always let your wife have the last word. No. But it certainly was the case probably for Pilate. A message, of course, to him is the message that we'll read in the Passion, that to have nothing to do with this innocent man. She'd been terrorized by the dreams of him. But like Mary Betton, I asked the question, where are you among the crowd gathered in Jerusalem this morning? Where are you gathered among the crowd? For this is the question of Holy Week. This is why we invite ourselves. Especially from those great 3 days of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then into Easter morning. To walk the way of Christ, to walk in his footsteps, to walk the way of suffering that starts today. It's why we place the reading of the Passion not in the middle of the service as it normally would as the major gospel, but at the end of the service, so that we can walk away reflecting on these things as we enter into this work. Mary Betton thought that she had, in fact, having written this plague escaped the implication of what she'd written until she had dinner shortly after its publication, and one of the monsignors in her area at dinner said to Mary, "Well, Mary, which of the characters are you?" And she realized that she was every one of them. Every one of them. In the epistle, the Apostle Paul invites us actually to go deeper. He doesn't ask us which of the members of the crowd are we. He says to us who we are. He says, have this mind in you. He says to the Philippians, have this mind in you which was in Jesus Christ. He identifies for us our role. That we are not the centurion. We're not Pilate. We are invited to be Jesus. Now, just in the reading of the Passion, the person that often is invited to be Jesus has a problem. But Paul says, have this mind in you, fellow Christians, that was in Christ Jesus, who though being in the form of God, didn't think of something to be held on to, but he emptied himself, he gave himself away, took the form of a servant, even of a human being, to the point of dying upon a cross, sacrificing himself, dying for me, whereby God, says Paul, highly exalted him, gave him a name above every name, that at the name of Jesus every tongue should confess and every knee bow. And every knee bow and call and confess him as Lord. He invites us to be Jesus in this story, to have his mind, to follow his way, to offer ourselves as servants in this world to every and anyone we find, maybe first as human beings, as Amy reminded us last week when she said from Irenaeus that the glory of God is a human being fully alive. That's also the invitation. But Irenaeus added, and the life of man as a human is the vision, the dream of God. And so we bring all of our Lenten focus on dreams to a conclusion. So what is the dream of God but the life of a human being lived in harmony with the love of God? So dream your way into Holy Week. Dream your way into Holy Week. Recognize what is happening as Jesus walks and takes so innocently walks to his death. That what we have here is God's love in action. And we're invited to be one of those who recognizes it as love, receives it as love, and then bears it as love. In all the riskiness of God having loved us in the first place, when we had the free will to say no and to reject. All the vulnerability of God being in our power, not us in God's power, because that's what love really does. Puts you into the hands of the other person. Love with all the limitlessness which we can see in God's love in creation, which just keeps on expanding. And we see in this gift of a life spent, a life exhausted for our sake. There is a preacher's legend. I call it not an urban legend. I call it a preacher's legend. Because it's a story from long, long ago that I'm sure it must have come out of a Billy Graham campaign sermon because I was into those things in my early days. It comes from my youth preaching, really. And it was a story you may have heard before, but it's about a group of sort of restless and reckless boys who sort of blunder their way into a church. And they've no idea what's there. They're kind of there just to have fun and to poke fun at the priest and whatever else is around. And the priest is actually around. He's able to sort of stop them as they're coming up the aisle and to challenge them. And they're kind of mocking him and all of these things. And right at the edge of the end of the sanctuary is a huge cross right over the altar. And he says, "I have a challenge for you," he says to the boys. And the leader of the group, the most brazen of all of them, just steps forward for the challenge. He says, "What's that then?" He said, "I bet you cannot say 3 times, looking at that cross, 'Jesus Christ, you died for me and I don't care.'" So he began. "Jesus Christ, you died for me and I don't care. Jesus Christ, you died for me and I don't care. Jesus Christ, you died for me." Were you there when they crucified my Lord? The crowd were in turmoil as he entered the city, and they were asking, "Who is he?"